I'm going to introduce Kim Jonker. Kim has been a long-time friend of Landesa's, way back before I joined. She's been doing philanthropy and been a thought leader. She teaches at Stanford on philanthropic issues, and she has most recently written a book that has become a standard for anybody in the field called Engine of Impact. We're lucky to have her, and of course, Landesa is lucky to have her as a friend. So, Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. There was a particular moment in 2005 when I first encountered Landesa and its founder, Roy Prosterman. I was sitting at this conference table and I was sorting through stacks and stacks of paper. They were applications and nominations for the Henry Kravis Prize in Nonprofit Leadership. And I was sitting at this table, there were coffee cups, and my eyes were starting to glaze over. I know many of you can relate. And I had this feeling as though I was trying to find gold in this mountain of sand. I'm sifting and sifting. And I think this sifting process very much reflected overall challenges in the sector. In fact, I often say that if a Martian came down from outer space and looked at the social sector, he would be totally perplexed. There are lots of words, lots of jargon, and lofty missions, and yet so many organizations lack a very clear description of what they do and how they do it. Many organizations have little or no evidence that their interventions actually work. And yet, many of those actually receive very generous funding. In fact, I think the Martian would be especially perplexed looking at what we call the social capital market, which is the funding flows in the sector. Because on the one hand, there are many organizations that are simply excellent, such as Landesa, that struggle to raise enough money. And then, on the other side, there are a number of organizations that have very fundamental flaws, and yet the funding pours in, often because there's a charismatic founder, knack for creating a buzz and whatnot. But there's often this disconnect. And then there are vast unmet needs in the world and significant economies of scale in the sector. And yet, most organizations are tiny, and they don't actually reach very many people. Many are stuck in what we call scale jail. So there I was at this table sifting with that look, and there came this moment when I felt like I had struck gold. I read a nomination that jumped off the page, and it was for Roy Prosterman, founder of Landesa. And at that point, over nearly 40 years, Landesa had improved the lives of nearly 100 million families across the globe through its design of land reform programs. Most people in extreme poverty, as we'll learn a little bit more with the next speakers, but they work in agriculture, and it turns out that owning a bit of land is a very crucial mechanism for escaping extreme poverty. So there I was, staring at this very real live example of impact at scale, with a mission that was clear and focused, and a strategy that was excellent. And yet, at that point in time, despite this very compelling model and demonstrated impact in the world, Landesa was very small. In fact, for most of its first 20 years, Prosterman ran the organization out of a one-bedroom apartment, and it was so small that they kept the files in the bathtub, and half of them were in the bathtub, and the other half were on the stove. And that went on for a long time, and despite all of that, they had astonishing impact. And since then, Landesa has grown considerably and come to further scale its impact in very exciting ways. After winning the Kravis Prize in that year, it was 2005, Landesa subsequently went on to raise its visibility considerably. There was the Skoll Award and the Hilton Humanitarian Prize, a number of awards and honors that seem to come every year. And it was encountering Landesa and other similar high-performing nonprofits that led me to write this book, Engine of Impact. Our book basically, I co-authored it with Bill Meehan, and it basically distills our research about what exactly makes a high-performing organization in the social sector. We identified 7 essential components. Success depends on the ability to master all of these components well at the same time. Landesa excels at all of them, and we use the metaphor of an engine. The engine itself is comprised of 4 elements. There's a well-focused mission, excellent strategy, impact evaluation that's rigorous, and the 4th is insight and courage, which is these intangible factors that often distinguish high-performing organizations. Typically, there's an insight about the unique way that a problem can be solved, and then there's the courage to bring it all to fruition. And in the book, we describe how Roy Prosterman's insights, which were actually gleaned in the midst of the Vietnam War, that at that point laid the foundation for all of the work to come at Landesa. And to operate the engine, there are 3 types of fuel. Funding, obviously, talent and organization, and then excellent board governance. And I want to do a quick deep dive on the first element, and that's mission. This is an area in which Landesa outperforms many other organizations that I see. And I want to talk a little bit about it because I think it really highlights what is distinctive about Landesa. So an ancient proverb reminds us that a fish rots from the head down. And in the social sector with nonprofits, that rot often starts with the mission. And that's because nonprofits are inherently mission-driven organizations. Companies in the private sector are often very focused and need to be focused on a singular goal, maximizing shareholder value. But in the social sector, organizations often lack that inherent clarity of purpose. And you often have many, many stakeholders with very different expectations and even competing expectations. And for that reason, a mission statement comes in very, very handy. It's a very useful tool, especially when it's very tightly focused, because it enables an organization to have a very helpful lens in being able to say, yes, we should do that. No, we should not do that. We should be in this program. We should exit that one. And yet, the problem is that most nonprofits today lack a mission statement that is focused. They're overly broad, they're lofty, and so it's often very difficult to make decisions about what to do and where and how to narrow things down. And even when an organization does have a very well-focused mission statement, there can be creep in the activities. In fact, we assert that mission creep is the leading virus in the social sector. Nonprofits are routinely expanding their activities far beyond their core competencies. They're stretched too thin. We can all think of a typical nonprofit that's trying to do 52 things at the same time, many of them not very well. And it's here that the nonprofit sector really has something to learn from the social sector. A fundamental axiom of corporate strategy is that more focused strategies outperform less focused ones. A high-performing business often focuses on a single product or a single business or a set of closely related businesses. And yet, the nonprofit sector is still overpopulated with organizations that are trying to do too many things. In the private sector, if a bakery suddenly decided, we're going to start making tennis rackets and pianos, and we're going to develop software, everyone would raise an eyebrow. And the equivalent happens every day in the social sector, and no one blinks. Landesa has stayed with its mission this focus on rural land reform for decades and decades, despite many, many temptations to creep. In fact, a number of years ago, I wrote a case study on an opportunity that had been presented to Landesa, and it was very generous funding and very exciting, and the staff were all excited about it, except it was urban. It wasn't rural. And many in this sector would have said yes, because it was just so generous and such great funding. It was in the former Soviet Union, which was a very exciting time to work at the time that this grant opportunity came to fruition. And Landesa had the discipline to say no, and they declined the funding. And the leadership has been wise then and now, and I see it as a bright light in the sector in abiding by a tight, focused mission. And mission and many of these other essential elements, they might seem pedestrian and obvious, but the problem is that they're deeply neglected in the sector. Bill and I did some research at Stanford. We joined forces with BoardSource and GuideStar and Stanford PACS and SSIR, and we surveyed 3,000 nonprofits. And we asked them a lot of questions about their leadership and strategy and management. And what we found is that 80% of nonprofits struggle with one of these core elements, at least one. And only 11% are actually excellent at all 7. At King Philanthropies, Landesa has been one of our top grantees in our King Essentials program for many years now. We've been honored to come alongside and fund Landesa's work in Myanmar, and I see Cindy Chen here and Christiana from that King Essentials team. We've funded Myanmar, Liberia, most recently Tanzania. We've been so impressed by the work on the ground and the team, and we decided to go long and have made multi-year commitments for many years to come. And one of the things that I think is especially impressive to us is that in addition to there being very real, tangible impact, the cost per beneficiary that the team has calculated from our grants is $3.62. So that means that we can make a meaningful difference in someone's life for every $4 that we spend. Less than the cost of your latte tomorrow. So to me, that doesn't get better than that. It couldn't be more exciting. And I think the best is yet to come. And since that day in 2005, when I first discovered Landesa, I have given quite a lot to the organization. But Landesa has given me so much in return. I've had the chance to encounter this amazing organization and team, to come alongside in this incredible work that you do. And I've had the chance to share some of your best practices with other organizations. And most importantly, I've had this chance to be inspired by the incredible dedication and commitment. To underscore that, I asked Chris how he's doing and how things have been, and he said great, and he's flying to Rwanda tonight after the event, and it's a level of commitment and dedication that few in this world can match. And so with that, I say thank you, and I reflect that this lovely irony of engaging and giving in the social sector, that the giver often receives much more than he or she has given. And I definitely feel like that's been the case at Landesa, and for that I say thank you.